Hey, it's Eric. This is the first in a series of videos that will go from a regular stand-up electric bass to electronic uh, laptop bass going through a laptop for using it as a controller and as a regular bass as well. So the first part of that whole journey for me anyway, was starting with a regular electric stand-up bass that was not really standalone by itself. So this is how I got mine. It's standing against the wall. If the bottom kicks out, this comes crashing down. If it slides this way or this way, it comes crashing down. If I go play like on a stage and I'm fortunate enough to be up against the wall, then I can lean it against the wall. Otherwise, if the stage is offset from the wall, I have to like go and do something over here. With a regular acoustic bass, you can just lie it down on the ground. It's big enough so no one's going to step on this. You lie it like this down on the ground, somebody's going to step on it, it's going to be out of tune, you won't be able to, it's just, so even though this was great to be able to play, and it's got like, nice things sticking out here, so it's like good position and, all that good stuff, this was not going to work. So, but I love the bass. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to put this on a tripod. So something like this. This is actually the second tripod that I'm going with. The first one had a couple of parts that would rattle. So if you get a tripod to put your bass on, then one of the things you'd look at is make sure everything clamps down solid and make sure there's no like loose rattly pieces. It won't usually come through, but especially if you have, like this is the pickups on this are like regular electric pickups. This is not piezo. But if you have like piezo or other transducer pickups, then any rattles and stuff like that, not a good thing. So a solid tripod. So this is pretty good. You can find your own. So then the question, like the first challenge, was to figure out how to get this attached to this with, in a way that would actually like kind of be relatively solid. Most of the degrees of freedom on this I don't need. This tilt adjustment is kind of useful. So let me see if I can, So anyway, what we want to do next is we want to figure out how to attach this to this. And the attachment point is this plate, and if you get a relatively heavy-duty tripod, then this plate is probably going to make sure that you kind of trust that this plate is going to be able to support like this amount of like wood and metal, because this obviously weighs a little bit more than your average camera. So if you can find something that works for like one of those news cameras or something like that, that'd be awesome. So anyway, the next step is to like figure out how to interface these two things. On this bass, I'm kind of this really wonderful piece of curved bent wood and so forth comes off, and I'm left with just the body. So like on other basses you might have just a stick coming out the bottom, or whatever you have. And so this part of my interfacing is probably not necessarily going to be relevant, but so if you want to skip forward, but well, the tripod part will be, the interfacing of the bass might not be. So only cover the tripod part. All right, so I think I have enough parts to at least kind of show what's going on with this. So this hole here is kind of the key, because this is what's going to, if you just put something on, like the first time I did this, I actually tried building something that would just kind of latch over here and latch over here, and built up enough metal on both sides so that it would hold like this, and that worked, but you had to get it very precise, and it's very heavy because there's a lot of wood buildup and stuff, and it's not particularly easy to take on and off, because you have to like slide it on and slide it off, and I was never really happy with it. So what I decided to do this time was I decided to make use of this hole in the center, and I got a piece of aluminum with aluminum tubing with exactly the outer diameter that I need to fit into this tightly. So basically this can fit into here, and that will, like, there's just no way that that's ever going to do any of this kind of sliding. So like if I can get this mounted to the base, you know, like a short piece of tube into here, get that mounted in a piece of wood, get the wood mounted securely to the base, guaranteed the base is not going to slide up and down without breaking this entire fixture, which I trust is going to be, you know, strong enough to hold this. So now, so I've chopped this aluminum, and then I need to make sure that it's not going to move, you know, against the wood either. So what I was thinking of doing was having like a piece of wood here, and then putting a piece of metal along the wood. So basically to make it reinforce it, and, you know, drill a hole in the metal, drill a hole in the wood, drill, and then have a short piece of tube that will stick out through here and be inside the metal, but, you know, prevented so the base won't slide because the piece of metal won't slide against the wood, and the wood won't slide against the base, and the wood and dowel will not, you know, wooden tube won't slide this way. So the only thing I have to do after that is constrain the base swinging this way or this way off of this thing, because it can't just be sitting in the tube, because, you know, it can wobble or, you know, whatever. So what I did was I added a little bit of metal on the top for, you know, against the plate. So I have the plate and then like a piece of metal against it. So it looks sort of like this is your plate. This is the stopper piece right here behind it, and so that way, like, it doesn't turn this way or this way, because it's resting on top of this little artificial shelf, and the strength is in the tube that's going through it. So between that, like between the resting and the tube holding it up, there's what I can do is I can just compress, like, you know, kind of put a couple of plates that are just, you know, screwed tight to kind of hold that all in place. But those plates aren't really taking any, like, you know, holding pressure at that point. So, you know, that should be enough to do it. So that was the first part of it. That's my goal for doing this. In terms of getting this piece of wood attached to the base, which is the second half, I'll sort of show you what that looks like. If your base is straight and you already have a different mounting mechanism using, like, you know, a piece of metal or a piece of old, like, you know, a guitar stand plus whatever, then this part's not relevant to you, but it's probably worth covering in case you have to do something with it. So offhand, this seemed like it was going to be pretty easy to do, because, you know, it's just drill a couple of holes in a piece of wood for these, and then attach a piece of wood on the back of this, and it's all good. What I found out after drilling it, which I can show you with this piece here, is that even though the base is kind of straight, it's not actually straight. So when you put this, when I got the piece of wood cut with the holes on it, let me see if I can show you this. There's a bunch of screws and crap on here, but so I'm probably exaggerating this slightly, but you can see that there's like this gap, and it's a pretty significant gap between the base and where the edge of the wood is. So, like, this piece of wood, turns out it couldn't be straight. So what I did was I bent it. So wood bending is, like, you know, a whole thing unto itself, and I'm, you know, none of these things are things that I'm particularly skilled at, but what I ended up doing, you can look up like how to do wood bending, because it's probably better to do that than me trying to explain how it works. But essentially you have to wet it and heat it, and then while it's, you know, hot, you bend it and leave it in a vise, and then wait until, like, you know, it kind of like settles, like for a day or something, and then you take it out of the vise and it's permanent bent. So getting a piece of wood like this, so I don't have like wood bending equipment, I don't have all the other stuff, so if it helps and you end up having to do this, the hack that I used was to basically get a piece of like pipe, cap the end, drop the wood into it like this, and then weigh it down with like a couple of shot glasses, fill this full of water. So now the wood is sitting completely immersed in water. It's held down with like, you know, a glass or whatever else you can stuff in the end to make it go. And then I just let that, you know, left that standing in the sink for, you know, basically overnight. And then what I did is, while the wood was like pretty much soaking wet, I wrapped it up in tin foil like a baguette and threw it in the oven at 350 for about an hour. And while it's hot, and it's very important, like you have very, very limited time to work with, especially if you're looking at like a maple 1x3, it cools off pretty quick. What you want to do is you immediately like slam that into a vise, and then so I had a vise offset from the work table, and then just screwed down the other end right against the table, so I was able to get a slight bend into the wood. And what that got me eventually is the pieces that I needed. All right, so I don't have all the intermediate parts that I use, so we'll just go with the finished part. There's this adapter that I got made, and you can see here, this is the piece of tubing that's going to go into the tripod. This is the little piece of back metal stop here that will keep it from tilting back and forth too much, because it'll just provide a rest, so it does, you know, to keep it from wobbling too much. And these are just pass-through holes to fit the screws that will then be just pressure mounted to the tripod to put that together. And this is, you know, after numerous attempts at bending, and it's, you know, been stained and, you know, tapered off the one by, try and make it look kind of half decent. When I did this, I ended up like learning how to weld aluminum, and so I welded the inside of this tube to the back of the metal plate, and then welded this stop part onto here. You could do this without welding. The way to do it would be to you would use some like, you make sure that when you drill this hole, it's a very nice tight fit. You fit it in tight here. If you glue all of this metal plate to the wood with some not PBR glue, but like the polyurethane glue, something like that's really bonding, and you get this stuck in the hole for the wood, also really bonded, then that's probably not going anywhere. And this can just be like, the stopper plate could just be screwed on. So anyway, that's if that's helpful for, you know, building a different interface. You know, it's just, you don't need a whole lot. You just need like enough strength to keep it from moving. So I'll show you how this works. So that fits up fairly tight against the back of the base, and this is also, if you're interfacing stuff, like this is magnetic coil pickups and not vibration sensitive, but I didn't want to like lose sustain or like, you know, have something, you know, rattling. So it's, make sure that this fits really snugly against the back, or things are, you know, you want it to be kind of somewhat one unit. You certainly don't want this fighting against the string vibrations. So anyway, that's how it goes. Yeah. All right, so here's how this mounts. Pull through the mount, and now the base is basically just resting. So now it's like there's not a lot of stress at this point, because the tube is kind of holding it in place. And now I do the pressure mounts. I have these labeled because it fits one way, of course. You can see that this is just going to provide a little bit of a lever to hold the bottom stable. Top. this is going to hold the top stable. It works faster when you're not videotaping. Anyway, so then I can just use the camera stand to adjust the height, lock it in, and now I've got a nice solid base. It's not going anywhere. Plays, and this is like my first part of rig.